Welcome to another Q&A. This Q&A is another newbie type question like how long will my DI resin last? And the real answer is how long is a piece of string, because there's so many variables that determine how long your DI resin lasts. But I'm going to cover some of them, hopefully sequentially, so that you can learn something. And then if you have any questions or comments below, put them below, and then that may help me define like another Q&A that's dedicated to a particular topic in this area, because it's quite complex. So, pardon me, in basic terms, the function of the DI resin is using a cation or an anion, because it's a mixed bed resin, to remove the minerals out of the water that's flowing through the resin. And the efficacy of the resin is determined by the flow rate and the amount of minerals that it needs to remove. And the summary of that is called contact time. So to try and give you some examples, if you are running 2 gallons a minute through a DI tank, the contact time of that water with the DI resin beads is really short, right? Because it's just zipping through. So we work on 1/2 gallon a minute for all the radial brushes. That's the standard flow rate. And our low flow for ultralight and light is 1/3 of a gallon a minute, or 1.5 liters per minute. And so one of the ways, if you're TDS, you're using your DI tank and the TDS is not going down below 10. Anything under 10 is always spot free, no matter what minerals. And if you don't have white minerals like calcium, magnesium, they dry white. If you don't have a lot of that in your water, then you might find the TDS could be 20, 30, 40, even 50 and still be spot free from a window cleaning perspective. The TDS meter is a conductivity meter. It's not a spot free meter. It's a guide, right? So you want to have a look at 1/2 gallon per minute, and then we would normally say that 1/2 cubic foot will remove up to TDS 150 at 1/2 gallon a minute flowing through with the contact time. That would be a good benchmark, a good standard for you to use. So let's go back to the math, and I'll talk in metric, but basically 1 liter is basically 1/4 of a gallon, right? So 1 cubic foot or 1 28-liter bag of virgin DI resin, it's got to be virgin DI resin, charged to 15 ohms, will remove around 3 million parts per million, right? So that, if you want to write to me and say, I've got this situation and that situation, anybody who asks me how long will my resin last, I can calculate roundabout. But the problem that we have is it's a mixed bed resin, and we don't know what's in your water. And the only measurement you can get from your local water board, if you Google water quality report, my town, there's normally a water quality report which will give you the hardness, which is calcium carbonate. It may give you magnesium, and then it may give you, hopefully it gives you the total dissolved solids, or the TDS. And if the calcium carbonate is usually in milligrams per liter, and the TDS is in parts per million, but they're the same. So if you see mg-L, that's the same as ppm. And if you're in an imperial situation, you might see grains per gallon, and then you can go to convert grains per gallon into ppm just in Google, and then you'll get an equivalent ppm comparison. So because we don't know very much more than that about what's in the water, nobody can say how long the resin will last, but we can estimate how long it'll last, and we can advise you towards a 50-50 standard mixed bed resin or a 65-35 hard water blend resin. So we're just talking with a customer in Canada at the moment, and they have 80% of the TDS that's in the water is hardness from their water quality report from their local municipality. So in that sense, they would be better to use a hard water resin, because most of it's calcium and carbon that needs to be taken out. And I have another video in the Reach It workshop on YouTube about calcium carbonate water hardness and how that works with DI resin. So you can watch that one to learn more about why a hard water blend, I think it's called, why would you use a hard water blend resin, something like that. So if you are not getting below TDS 10, one of the ways to test whether the resin is working is you can turn the flow rate down, let's say from half a gallon a minute to quarter of a gallon per minute, and if the TDS comes below if the TDS comes below 10 at a lower flow rate, you just gave it more contact time, so it means the resin works, but the amount of TDS that it needs to take out is greater than the ability of it to remove that TDS at that flow rate. And if you have that situation, you can add another DI tank, so you in series, so it goes through 1 tank, 2 tanks, 3 tanks, so you can go from quarter of a cubic foot to half a cubic foot to 3/4 of a cubic foot if you want to stay with DI resin. Or, as we would normally recommend, if you get over TDS 150, then you're really getting into the area where you're going to have a financial return as a professional window cleaner to use a reverse osmosis DI system. We still use DI to polish the water and make it TDS 0 to 10, but we use a reverse osmosis membrane which uses pressure, water pressure, to separate the minerals out. So we have half the water goes to waste, half the water goes to pure, and then that pure water goes through the DI resin tank, and that's what gives you the TDS 000. So that would be the right solution if your TDS locally is over 150 normally. However, we do have a lot of customers that continue to use DI resin over TDS 150 for the simplicity that it delivers to your business. You don't have any issues with water temperature, you don't have any issues with water pressure. You know, there's a lot of little complications that go around owning an RODI system. So if you just want simplicity and simple work for your workers, then you're just going to use DI resin. So that works. And I think, and the only other thing which I often recommend to people is that if they have a very high TDS and they want to use DI because they don't have many jobs, then rather than trying to make 2 tanks is fine, but going to 3 or 4 tanks, going to 3/4 of a cubic foot or a full cubic foot, maybe you're better to go to Culligan's or National DI in the US, and these guys have huge, heavy, horrible, but effective 1 cubic foot DI tanks, right? And they rent them to you full of resin. It's regenerated resin, right? So it's not virgin resin. And so it has a lower charge on it compared to virgin resin. But the benefit of that is that you can actually, I don't know what they are, $120, $130, and you can get started, right? Later on, you can say, okay, I've got more work, and then you can go and get a Flow Red Plus. But it's better than messing around, because it's just swap and go, right? Your DI tank, your TDS starts creeping up, and then you just drive down to your Culligan's, take your tank off, put the new tank on, and drive off again, and that's your overhead, even if it's relatively regularly. But more often than not, that's a good strategy for window cleaners or pressure washers that are doing window cleaning in hard water areas that are not doing that much window cleaning, that they would want to invest in a reverse osmosis DI system like Flow Red Plus. Okay, so I think that is a good answer. Yeah, so dual DI tank. So if you look at our products, that's a good question. Our standard pack for a professional window cleaner is a dual DI tank, and our starter packs have single DI tanks. But when we're selling this, if we get to talk to the customer or you or whoever, right, then we'll check what your TDS is and we'll recommend you to get 2 DI tanks. The reason we do that is that there's 2 reasons. One is that you get double the contact time, right? So the relevance of this conversation makes sense at that point. And the second reason, even if you've got TDS 50, you don't really need 2 tanks. However, you can never tell when the DI is going to exhaust, the DI resin is going to exhaust. So the second tank becomes your redundancy. So every day, it depends how high your TDS is. If it's TDS 50, it could be every once a week. but if it's TDS 100, it might be every second day. You check the TDS out from the first tank at the flow rate that you use, not at a massive flow rate, like half a gallon a minute. That's what you use, that's what you test. And then when you see the first tank starting to creep, connect it all back up again, and when that gets up to 20 or 30 or 40, it just basically gives you a warning that you could that you need to change that tank, right? Because either the cation has failed or the anion has failed in the mixed bed resin. So one of them is failing. They're not both failing at the same time. So at that point, you would change the resin in the first tank. You'd make your second tank, which has been working as a redundancy, and you'd make that your first tank, and then you put your first tank with the new resin in as your second tank. So you've always got, you know, redundancy in your full redundancy in your assembly of your filtering system. Yeah, does that answer that? Great. Okay, so if you have any comments, if you do it differently, if you have any suggestions for other window cleaners, right, and you've got any experiences, then please add them to the comments below. We like them, right? Sometimes you raise a comment and I'll make another Q&A, or you raise a comment and it edifies and adds to this commentary, and then that would give other window cleaners something more to learn than, you know, what I've been able to share. So we love your comments, yeah? All right, I think that's enough for today, yeah? All right, see you on the next one.